has a willingness, and he has an obsession.
People in this world get very excited when Steven puts out a movie because it's an event.
There's probably a lot more Steven in his movies than he would like to admit.
Clear background, please.
Guys, places, please.
Steven Spielberg really changed my life because he was the model. He was the model to say, this is how you do it. This is how you do it.
And action.
Over a quarter of a century, his films have exhilarated, terrified, and touched moviegoers around the world. Today, the name of director Steven Spielberg conjures up both cinema magic and the highest peak of Hollywood success.
Steven is just this guy who periodically rewrites the book on how films are made.
But as a boy, Steven Spielberg battled insecurity and loneliness. He was devastated by his parents' divorce, confused by his Jewish heritage, and he channeled his self-doubts and his dreams into stories that would captivate the world.
I told Steve, if I had known how famous he was going to be, I would have had my uterus bronzed.
Steven Allen Spielberg made his world premiere on December 18th, 1946, in Cincinnati, Ohio's Jewish hospital. He was the first of 4 children born to Arnold and Leah Spielberg. Arnold had served in World War II as an Air Force radio operator in Burma, and his dramatic tales of wartime adventure would later fire his son's imagination. After the war, Arnold worked in the new field of computer engineering, which often took him away from the Spielbergs' comfortable suburban home. Steven's mother, Leah, was outgoing and playful, a lover of the arts and a talented pianist.
One night we had a chamber music concert in the house, and I guess the violins had gotten to this infant. He was so hysterical, he had to be sedated. And for a long time, I couldn't practice the piano anymore. The minute he would hear a note of music, he'd start to cry.
He was a problem baby. It was hard to get him to sleep. It was hard to get him to put to bed. He was very curious about everything. He had great big ears. His head drew around to fit the ears, you know. But he was a cute little kid.
Steven Spielberg would inherit his mother's passion for drama and his father's fascination with technology. He also got Arnold's workaholic energy.
He was into everything. He darted around, tasting and feeling, and then dropping it and going on to something else.
In 1949, when Steven was 2.5, the family moved from Cincinnati to Camden, New Jersey, where Arnold was hired by RCA as a computer engineer. The move was the first of many to unsettle Steven's growing up over the next 15 years. Just as I'd become accustomed to a school and a teacher and a best friend, he later said, the for sale sign would dig into the front lawn. But during his time in New Jersey, Steven discovered what would take the place of close friendships in his childhood. At age 5, he saw his first movie, Cecil B. DeMille's The Greatest Show on Earth.
The marvel of marvels, the thrill of thrills.
At first, he was disappointed. He expected a real circus. But images from the film burned into his brain. And as he grew up, he found inspiration in a fantasy world of movies, television, and science fiction. He gained an encyclopedic knowledge of their images and related to their stories of aliens and outcasts.
He was not a macho guy and not athletic. Steve turned inward, tapped inside.
Growing up in mostly Gentile neighborhoods, Steven struggled with his Jewish heritage, which he felt divided him from his friends. He later admitted, I was ashamed of being a Jew. But Steven paid attention to the family stories he heard of Jewish life and the Holocaust.
My mother used to teach English to the survivors, and so Steve was exposed to this whole group of survivors from the time he was a child. He told the story of a man showing him the number on his arm and showing him this is a 6, and if I turn my arm, it's a 9.
By 1956, 3 daughters had completed the family, Susan, Nancy, and Anne. Stephen's feelings about his sisters were a mix of love and resentment, partly over being the only boy in a house full of girls.
He had two definite sides of his personality. It was a real Jekyll Hyde there. He was both my best friend, then on any occasion where he felt that I had done something to him, he would wait until Saturday when everybody left the house, and that would be the I'm gonna beat you up day. But he gave you warning all week. He would say, just wait till Saturday. Just you wait until Saturday.
He had incredible talent for torture, torturing the sisters. Nancy, his youngest sister, had gotten a doll for Hanukkah. And he knocked on Nancy's door of her room with this platter, my china platter, the doll's head on a bed of lettuce, garnished with tomatoes. I mean, that's terrible, that's sick.
But the moment that was over, it was as if a big cloud had gone away, and it was like, okay, now what should we play? And what do we play always had to do with making up a story. One of the earliest stories he ever told me, which gave me recurring nightmares, was about the moon, and that the moon was a living thing, and that it would come down to Earth and be right outside my window anytime I opened the door. Which is amazing because in Close Encounters, there's a scene where from the mothership sends all these spaceships down, and the kid opens the door and there is light all around and things trying to get in. And I think that these are the themes that he carried with him.
In 1957, the Spielbergs moved again to Phoenix, Arizona, where Arnold began work for General Electric. And a new home couldn't stop the growing tension in Arnold's and Leah's marriage, something Steven was painfully aware of. But during his 7 years in Phoenix, Steven Spielberg found what he later called his first real home. He also found his future.
We used to go on camping trips, we used to go on picnics, and I would have a habit of cranking down the window and taking my camera and just panning, the landscape as the cars flew by. Steve couldn't stand it. He said, "Dad, I'm tired of you taking landscapes flying by the car. Let me have the camera, will you?" So I let him take the camera, and he filmed our camping adventure. And it was good. There was a lot of creativity there. He used slow motion, fast motion, turn his camera upside down. He would take all sorts of different pictures and study after he came out. So I thought to myself, boy, he doesn't care how much money he's spending, but boy, he's learning.
Steve just filmed constantly. Steve was not interested in school. I made up medical terms that he had, and then we would go out in the desert and do films.
Inspired by the epic vision of directors like David Lean, Steven decided at age 13 to make a film set in World War II. The 20-minute Fighter Squad ingeniously mixed documentary footage with film shot by Steven at the Phoenix airport.
They let one kid in the cockpit with a helmet on, pretending to fly the plane, pulling his stick and making faces like that, and like he's being shot at. And then Steve would take the camera and tilt it like that, and then he'd tilt it like that. And he literally imitated the plane's motion.
Though Arnold supported Steven's filmmaking, there was friction between father and son.
They were not close when Steve was younger. Arnold couldn't get Steve to buckle down, and he was disappointed in him, I think, as a child. I mean, I think he thought Steve would never amount to anything.
Well, I wanted him to be an engineer, which he never wanted to be. So that was bad. He used to be mad at me for wanting him to be an engineer because he hated math, he hated science. He'd come to me, "Dad, I got to write this chemistry experiment up. How am I going to do that?" I said, "Well, I think the experiment went like this, Steve." So I'd write it up for him. I'd show him what would have come from this kind of a result. He'd hand the paper and get a D. He said, "Dad, you flunked."
Steven's next film, the World War II story Escape to Nowhere, earned him his first rave review outside the neighborhood, winning first prize in a statewide contest. Encouraged by success, 16-year-old Steven dreamed bigger and made his first feature-length movie, the science fiction drama Firelight. It was a first draft for a later Spielberg film, Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Firelight was a piece of blue gel in between two glass plates with Vaseline, which he would rub together like that and shoot the camera through it, and that would give a swirling effect.
He wanted an explosion in a pressure cooker, whatever that means, I don't know. I had to go to the store and buy cherries, canned cherries and heavy syrup, And I'm an obedient person. And I opened all the cans, like 12 cans of big cherries. He had everything ready. And at the given sign, I hurled the contents all on my beautiful ash cabinets. And as they very slowly oozed, he's filming, okay? Lived in that house 8 years. Every morning, did the same thing. Came out, took a sponge, and got all the cherry. It never stopped seeping.
On March 24th, 1964, Firelight had its premiere at a downtown Phoenix movie theater, which Arnold and Leah had rented for the night. With a single showing, Firelight made back its entire cost of $600. Not long after shooting the film, Steven got a close look at the Hollywood empire he dreamed of being a part of. On a school break, he visited Los Angeles and Universal Studios. On the lot, he met studio librarian Chuck Silvers, and the result was a friendship that would change Spielberg's life.
There was this scrawny little kid, and he was Mr. Excitement himself. And it took maybe about 5 minutes for me to realize I wasn't talking to just an ordinary kid.
That summer, with Chuck Silver's help, Steven got a job at Universal Studios as an unpaid clerical assistant. For 3 months, he roamed the lot, meeting movie stars and visiting every department that would take him in.
I've heard that on occasion, he would actually sleep in one of the rooms there.
But Steven's self-confidence was about to suffer a painful setback. In 1964, the Spielbergs moved to Saratoga in Northern California. And that fall, Steven began his senior year at Saratoga High, a conservative school with few Jewish students. It was a miserable time Steven later called hell on earth.
He was not accepted. It was pointed out that he was Jewish in a negative way. They mussed him up a little bit.
I remember Steve sitting there on the patio just bouncing the ball like that, sort of like, what am I doing with myself? What am I going to do?
Steven Spielberg's world was about to be shaken by an even greater personal blow. But just beyond it would come a lucky break that changed his life and his future in the movies. Steven Spielberg graduated from Saratoga High in June of 1965, but his escape from the school he hated was a short-lived victory. That same month, Steven's father, Arnold, left the family home in Northern California and moved to Los Angeles. Arnold and Leah Spielberg filed for divorce the following year.
Steve and I think he was mad at me, first of all, for getting divorced. That's number one. Mad at his dad for abandoning his mother. Whether it was true or not, that was his conception.
The Vietnam War was underway, and Steven knew he was a prime target for the draft. To stay out, he turned to college and applied to LA's two top film schools, USC and UCLA. Both turned him down. Steven enrolled at nearby Long Beach State, but he found his real film school inside the gates of Universal Studios.
He got on the lot, I believe, through the good graces of one of the guards. I'm told he even somehow set up an office and all that sort of thing. I've never seen it. I don't disbelieve it.
A couple of directors would say, well, how would you shoot this scene? And Steve would take a crack at it. And he used to tell me, I've given good ideas to the monkeys and I don't get any appreciation for it. He actually gave them skid ideas, you know what I mean?
Steven also studied the work of his peers, a new generation of filmmakers that included Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola. One night, Spielberg saw a student film that he said made him jealous to the marrow of his bones. Its director was a USC student named George Lucas.
At that point, it was very hard for people on the outside of the film business to get into it and to make movies. And so I think a lot of us helped and encouraged each other. A lot has been said about us being competitive and everything, and I never noticed anybody being competitive. I mean, there was a friendly kind of competition of, we always hoped we would make the best movie, but we were always willing to help each other make the best movie.
The big thing these guys brought to the party, Steven and George and Martin Scorsese, was a sort of exuberant regard for a certain kind of movie of the past. They were hip. They were extraordinarily knowledgeable historically about movies.
Spielberg passionately wanted a film of his own to show the industry. His first attempt was a short drama about cycling, but bad weather and lack of money killed the project. Undiscouraged, Steven wrote a new, simpler film. And in 1968, at age 21, Steven Spielberg made the movie that became his ticket to Hollywood.
Amblin was something that he wrote very quickly. This is a topic of a straight-laced man who has this subculture identity, and he doesn't know which one he really lives in. Is it the one that's going to go for the books and go to school, or is it the guy who's the free-wheeling guy on the road? If I look at Steve now and look back, that there's quite a bit of that in him.
One morning, I got a phone call from Steve, and he said, I've made a film, and I'd like to show it to you. And I'll be very honest with you. When it came down to the end, I found tears in my eyes. Sid Sheinberg was the head of television production. So I called his office, and I said, I have a 26-minute film here that you must see. You've got to see it tonight because somebody else is liable to see it tomorrow.
It had an enormous amount of heart and sensitivity to it, and I really thought it was quite terrific.
Thanks to Amblin and Chuck Silvers, Spielberg got the call he had been waiting for. In the fall of 1968, he met with Sid Sheinberg at Universal Studios.
He looked like your ordinary run-of-the-mill geek. He was very slender and small, but in his own way, I thought he was a very impressive young man.
1 week later, Steven Spielberg signed a 7-year contract with Universal Studios. The excited young director asked Chuck Silvers what he could do for him to say thank you.
I said, I want two things. I want you to help in any way you can, young people like yourself. He said, okay. And he said, what's the other thing? And I said, whenever we meet, I want a hug. He kept his word. And the fact remains that every time I see Steven, and it doesn't make any difference who else is in the crowd or where it is, I get my hug.
On January 31st, 1969, Steven Spielberg dropped out of Long Beach State with few regrets. The very next day, the 22-year-old was on a Universal soundstage working with a Hollywood legend as Spielberg made his television directing debut. The assignment was one segment of the 3-part TV movie Night Gallery, written by Rod Serling. The star was 62-year-old Joan Crawford, playing a cruel millionairess obsessed with regaining her sight. Originally, Bette Davis was set to star, but she refused to work with such a young director. When Spielberg heard Joan Crawford had signed on, he broke into a cold sweat.
I heard when she found out that this kid was going to direct her, she raised hell, no way. And then she met him, and she really fell in love with him.
Spielberg won Crawford over with gifts and knowledge of her films. He had a tougher time with his crew, TV veterans 3 times his age, who were openly skeptical of their young director. When Night Gallery aired on November 8, 1969, reviews were mixed. A frustrated Spielberg tried to escape TV and launch a feature film, but no one would hire him. Reluctantly, he returned to television, where in time his visual flair and strong work with actors earned him respect at Universal. Finally, in the spring of 1971, Steven Spielberg got the break he had waited for. The TV movie Duel was the tale of a mild-mannered everyman terrorized by an unseen truck driver. In Spielberg's hands, it became a masterpiece of suspense.
And the studio called up and said, we've got a young director under contract, hasn't done much. Would you mind using him on Duel? Because we feel that he's a comer. We feel that he's energetic and very creative and very enthusiastic, and we feel he has a great career ahead of him. And I said, well, fine, let's try. He was everything they said that he was. He's very energetic, very enthusiastic, very willing to take chances and gamble, if you will. All of the things that he had to work with as a director, the camera, sound, the actors, they were like toys for him.
With just 16 shooting days and a limited location, Spielberg created the most acclaimed television movie of its time. Outside the U.S., Duel earned millions in European movie houses. It won several awards and even praise from Spielberg's idol, British director David Lean.
I spoke with Steven not too long ago, and he said that, I got to tell you, I look at this film at least twice a year to teach myself what I did.
Steven Spielberg's career was now in high gear, and just ahead was his first theatrical feature.
You broke out a pre-release?
Oh, shut up, mind your own business.
In 1972, at age 25, Spielberg got the green light from Universal to make the comedy drama The Sugarland Express. It was inspired by a newspaper story Spielberg read about a Texas ex-convict who sparked a massive police pursuit. In Spielberg's version, the convict and his wife, played by Goldie Hawn, are on the run to save their son from adoption. It was the first of many Spielberg films that echoed the agony of his family's breakup. But its making was pure joy.
The light in his eyes when he was on the roof of a chicken takeout place, watching all the police cars, the same police cars he threw in my crib, and he was jumping up and down and looked over, but there was this, look at what I'm doing. I'm doing something I love, really love.
The Sugarland Express teamed Steven for the first time with composer John Williams, a partnership that's lasted a quarter of a century.
So we met in a very fancy restaurant in Beverly Hills. And Steven looked to me to be about 16 years old, and he gave the impression of somebody that's never been in a restaurant before. And the waiter came over and said, would you like some wine? And he looked at him like, what's that? Why would anybody want wine? Among the first things he did was, he said, I remember your score from such and such a movie. And he would sing the third subordinate theme of Aunt Sarah's character in some film that I'd forgotten I did, and remember it all, as he still does. So tremendous retention, tremendous energy, tremendous youth and vitality and all of that, and sweetness.
When the Sugarland Express opened on April 5th, 1974, reviewers hailed an important new director. Critic Pauline Kael called it one of the most phenomenal debut films in the history of movies. But the film crashed at the box office. Viewers expected to see Goldie Hawn in a comedy and were shocked by the story's tragic ending. Its failure was a stunning blow to Steven Spielberg.
He had taken a lesson from Sugarland Express, where he had gotten the greatest reviews in history and no one saw the movie, and he swore that would never happen again.
Steven Spielberg learned from his box office failure and hooked the masses with his very next film, one that changed not just his fortunes, but the history of Hollywood. 1973, during the making of his first feature, The Sugarland Express, Steven Spielberg visited the office of the film's producers, David Brown and Richard Zanuck. Spielberg noticed they had the galleys for a new novel, Peter Benchley's Jaws. Brown and Zanuck had optioned the book, but they had other directors in mind for the film. Still, the 26-year-old Spielberg convinced them that even on a modest budget, he could make something fun. Spielberg and his writers turned the subplot-heavy novel into a streamlined story of terror. Spielberg also sought out fresh faces for his leads to heighten the sense of ordinary people in an extraordinary situation.
He told me the story of Jaws, and it was a thriller, let me tell you. I mean, just the way he told that story was unbelievably riveting. And then he said, "You want to do the movie?" And I said, really stupidly, I said, no. And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I would rather see this movie rather than shoot it, because it'll be so difficult to shoot." And then I saw a film of mine that I just hated the performance. And when I saw how bad I thought I was, I called him and I begged for the part. I came crawling back.
But casting was the least of Spielberg's problems. What began as a medium-budget thriller became a legendary movie-making nightmare. Jaws' 55-day schedule tripled into 159 days. Its $4.5 million budget more than doubled to $10 million.
We started that movie without a script, without a cast, and without a shark. And we had no shark. The shark was being built as we started to shoot, and it didn't work.
And action, Roy. Slow ahead. I can go slow ahead. You ought to come down and ladle some of this.
And cut.
There were radio mics for the Jaws crew in every nook and cranny on Martha's Vineyard, so that literally you could walk down any street on Martha's Vineyard and you could hear, "The shark is not working. The shark is not working." And you didn't even have to be part of the crew to know that the shark is not working. And one day, you could hear this. "The shark is working. The shark is working. The boat is sinking." And I was on that boat.
As expensive location days passed, with little film to show for them, Spielberg kept his calm. But amid rumors of panic back at Universal, Spielberg feared that Jaws might be a career-killing disaster.
About the 50th or 60th day of shooting, the crew would come over to me and they'd all ask me during the day, "When are we going to be done with this movie?" And I would honestly say to them, "I don't know. I don't know when we're going to finish this movie. We could finish it if I get fired and dragged off the movie, then somebody else could come in and finish it quickly. Maybe they'll shut us down."
I saw him come out of the water after a day's shooting and lay down at the edge of the water, exhausted like that. You know, he just collapsed.
No, bring it out now. Bring it out. Bring it out. Okay, attack. Attack.
Let down by the mechanical monster he had hoped to feature, Spielberg and editor Verna Fields turned the problem to their advantage. By keeping the shark screen time to a minimum, they played on audiences' terror of the unseen.
What happened to Steven on Martha's Vineyard was a very profound thing. He wound up facing an opportunity to have himself tested in a way that few people ever have. It was on every level, on every day, an excruciating experience. And his ability to retain his sense of creativity and calm allowed him not only to endure, but to prevail. The screaming and yelling and all of the stress and all of the pressure, he accepted it with a kind of grace that, with all the stories one hears about Steven's growing up and childhood and all that, it's as if he had prepared himself for that moment from the time he was 10 years old. He knew that he could be everything he wanted to be after that summer.
Smile, you son of a...
Enhanced by John Williams' landmark score, Jaws had its first sneak preview in Dallas on March 26, 1975. Spielberg watched from the back as viewers shrieked, jumped, and cheered. A second preview in Long Beach, California won a standing ovation. And within days of its premiere on June 20th, Jaws was a full-fledged phenomenon. It drove swimmers out of the water and into theaters, becoming the first movie to make over $100 million. By September, Jaws was the #1 hit of all time. At age 28, Steven Spielberg was a millionaire, but more importantly to him, he was a respected filmmaker.
I think that the most important thing to Steve about becoming successful was getting the permission to do what he wanted to do.
Spielberg was more interested in work than a lavish lifestyle or a serious relationship. In February 1976, he confidently expected an Oscar nomination for Jaws. But the morning the nominees were announced, Spielberg was crushed to learn that he had been passed over. It wouldn't be for the last time.
It's a very competitive business. And if you've put your life into this business, and along comes some kid who comes out of nowhere and has what was for that time a virtually unprecedented success, there's going to be a natural, generational, even class resentment.
But Spielberg had won unqualified raves from his favorite critics, the movie-going public. And by 1976, viewers wondered what he would do for an encore to Jaws. The answer was a film that Steven Spielberg both directed and wrote, a film he had dreamt of since a magical night from his childhood 2 decades before. By 1976, Steven Spielberg was the world's hottest young director after the commercial and critical triumph of Jaws. For his next film, Spielberg embarked on a movie even bigger in scope, one inspired by an unforgettable personal experience.
I must have been around 5 or 6 years old. And my dad woke me up in the middle of the night, and we drove to this field. And there were all these people in this field, several dozen. And we looked up at the sky. It was this fantastic meteor shower. And I think that was my first introduction to the world beyond the Earth. It probably first impregnated me with wanting to tell stories not of this world.
When Spielberg began writing and directing Close Encounters of the Third Kind, science fiction was considered commercially risky in Hollywood. But Spielberg identified strongly with his story's hero, an ordinary man with extraordinary visions. To play Roy Neary, he cast the actor that he called his alter ego, Richard Dreyfuss.
When we started to shoot Close Encounters, I sat in on a production meeting. And that was a new Steven for me. I had not seen that before. That was a completely efficient, adult, no kidding around guy who was giving the marching orders to his people.
The complicated making of Close Encounters lasted even longer than Jaws. Spielberg again struggled with a rising budget, this time with Columbia Pictures, which already faced a financial crisis.
On the second day we're shooting Close Encounters, he gets a telegram. We're shooting at Devil's Tower. We're 90 miles away from the town. We've got the whole company around the mountain, and he got a telegram saying that he was fired. And he was fired, and they were shutting down the movie. And he just freaked out, as well he should. And we sat around and talked about it, and he realized this was just someone's overreaction. And in fact, it was.
Production continued, but so did the tension. When the studio refused money for a special effect, Spielberg paid for it himself. And from his co-workers, he demanded the same passionate commitment.
I talk to many people who work with him, and they're sometimes pulling their hair and wondering, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? But when you see the relationship one-on-one with Steve and the crew, there's this willingness to perform, to want to give your best to this project.
And if someone screws up on a set, he'll let them know it real quickly.
Spielberg was frustrated by Columbia's fixed release date and rushed to finish his final edit. On the eve of the premiere, on November 16, 1977, some critics predicted disaster. But Spielberg triumphed again. Close Encounters earned nearly $270 million and confirmed with George Lucas's Star Wars that year that science fiction was big business. In 1978, Close Encounters earned Spielberg his first Academy Award nomination for Best Director. He lost to Woody Allen, director of Annie Hall, but Spielberg wasn't through with Close Encounters. Dissatisfied with the film, which he had rushed to finish, he made cinema history by re-editing it 2 years later. The success of his special edition paved the way for other filmmakers to create their own director's cuts. Among the actresses he had considered for Close Encounters was a 22-year-old named Amy Irving. After their meeting, Spielberg told a co-worker, "I just met a real heartbreaker." Amy didn't get the part, but within weeks, she and Steven were romantically involved.
She was very much a person with her own ambitions and her own career. She certainly kept him on his toes. You know, she's a very feisty person. She didn't roll over for anything. So that tested him. I think we all want someone who's basically going to adore us and tell us that we're great and do whatever we want them to do. And Amy certainly wasn't that kind of person.
By 1978, Steven's busy career was creating new pressures.
His time was not his anymore. He suddenly was really getting involved with the press and with producers and with lots and lots and lots of people coming to him with everything, with questions, with projects, with things they wanted. I think that Steve went through a period of time that he was frightened of people.
But Spielberg did reach out to help other young filmmakers. In 1978, he gave director Robert Zemeckis his first break by producing the Beatlemania comedy, I Want to Hold Your Hand.
I always thought that Steven was, exactly what a director should be. I mean, he was incredibly focused. I mean, he knew everything. I mean, he knew what the camera should be doing. He knew what the camera operator should be doing. He knew what the lighting should be like. He knew what everybody's job should be. It's war.
Zemeckis also co-wrote Spielberg's next film, a wild slapstick comedy set in the early days of World War II. It appealed to Spielberg's fascination with the war, his love of cartoonish humor, and his appetite for big-screen destruction. The film was 1941.
What the hell do you people think you're doing?
I really didn't know what I was doing on this movie. I gotta tell you, I think one of the reasons the film came out so chaotic is I really didn't have a vision for 1941.
Grown men.
Spielberg later called the film a conceptual disaster. The script's heavy-handed humor was made worse by a drug-addicted star and a spiraling budget.
I think in 1941 there may have been too many ideas. I don't think we were as assured as writers then, and I think the screenplay reflected that, and then I think that Steven was a bit insecure with the material.
Preview audiences confirmed to Steven that 1941 was no Jaws. Sensing disaster, he and Amy skipped the film's premiere at Hollywood's Cinerama Dome. But Spielberg couldn't hide from the critics. Reviews were vicious.
It was depressing. It would have made anyone question themselves, and it was hard for all of us to have to deal with at the time.
1941 would make a profit, but Spielberg's image took a powerful hit. His critics and rivals in the industry got their chance to gloat. Steven Spielberg, Hollywood wunderkind, had finally spectacularly failed. Steven Spielberg was devastated by the disastrous reviews for his film 1941. The acclaimed director of Jaws and Close Encounters was now being called financially irresponsible and creatively bankrupt. By the end of 1979, Spielberg's personal life was also troubled. That December, Amy Irving told friends she and Steven were about to be married. Instead, within weeks, the pair had split. Life has finally caught up with me, the 33-year-old Spielberg said after the breakup. I avoided all the grown-up pains by being too busy making movies. I didn't escape suffering, I only delayed it.
I think he spends himself on his movies, and there's very little left over sometimes. I mean, it's an emotion like a relationship, but it's the relationship with the film. So what's left?
Fortunately, work on another movie blockbuster came to Spielberg's rescue. His friend George Lucas had the idea for Raiders of the Lost Ark years before, in the early 1970s. In 1977, Lucas and Spielberg were vacationing in Hawaii when Lucas recalled his old idea about an archaeologist adventurer.
It was just really an idle conversation about Steven saying he really wanted to do a James Bond film, and he had tried to get to do one of them. And me saying that I had this project that I'd been working on for a few years, and that it was better than a James Bond film.
I think Stevens was drawn to it as a
opportunity to reinvent the films that he had seen when he was growing up. Cliffhanger endings and that kind of a dramatic form. I never thought that they were very high-quality filmmaking, those Saturday matinee serials, but obviously they made a strong impression on Steven and George.
Harrison Ford had co-starred in Lucas's Star Wars, but Ford was not the first pick for Raiders.
Tom Selleck was in line for the role of Indiana Jones. George explained to me that Tom was under contract to a network for a series and it would be impossible for him to do it. So I read the script, which I thought was fantastic. Steven's instinct was to make the character as complicated as the genre would bear, to give him some real emotions, to complicate his personality as much as possible.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
After 1941, Spielberg was determined to show he could direct a film for a modest cost. On Raiders, he worked faster and cheaper than he'd done in years, especially with help from his friend and producer, George Lucas.
We both wanted the other person to do what they wanted. We never fought over anything. There were a few points of humor that I disagreed with that I pulled out of the film that he still kvetches about, but I think it was for the best of the movie.
I would hear Steven occasionally mumble some vague complaint about George not wanting us to do something or other, and then we'd go ahead and do it anyway.
Attending an early screening of the film was a Paramount Pictures executive who later would play a key role in Spielberg's life, Jeffrey Katzenberg.
I think it was pretty charged up night. I mean, a lot of excitement and a humongous amount of anxiety on everybody's part. George and Steven, their first real collaboration together, and Steven coming off 1941, coming back with a vengeance. Well, the audience went completely nuts. You know, they were standing in their seats and, you know, screaming and yelling and cheering. I mean, you knew it as soon as that ball came rolling down. That was it. He owned him.
Raiders of the Lost Ark put Steven Spielberg back on top. It grossed $363 million and earned Steven his second Oscar nomination. Again, he would lose, this time to Red's director Warren Beatty. Filming Raiders in the African desert of Tunisia had put Spielberg in a reflective mood. Away from the people he loved, he found himself recalling old, sometimes painful memories.
I walked out into the desert trying to figure out how can I tell the story of this lonely boy. I'm sitting here, I'm a lonely director, and I was feeling a little bit separate from myself. Suddenly, bang, this concept hit me.
Steven Spielberg was ready to tell a story close to his heart. A story drawn from his feelings of being an outsider and inspired partly by his parents' divorce. The result was a movie phenomenon whose appeal was literally out of this world. In 1981, after the box office triumph of Raiders of the Lost Ark, director Steven Spielberg began shooting a smaller scale film, one that would become the most personal of his career so far.
With E.T., I had always really wanted to tell the story of a disenfranchised and lonely boy in a relationship with siblings. And I also wanted to tell a story about the divorce of my parents.
Maybe you ought to call your father and tell him about it.
I can't. He's in Mexico with Sally.
At age 35, Spielberg took the pain of his parents' divorce and channeled it into E.T., the extraterrestrial. Though the filming was intensified by a tight $10 million budget, Spielberg loved working with E.T.'s young cast, led by Henry Thomas and Drew Barrymore. For the first time, Spielberg said he felt like a father.
He's a great listener, And as a child to be listened to, it's the greatest gift in the world, because adults are like, yeah, okay, anyway, back to our adult conversation. And he's not like that. He never was. I think because he's youthful himself.
Can't take him away, he's mine!
I do remember my screen test. The direction that Steven gave was, do you have a pet? Do you have something that you cared about that got taken away from you? That's what this scene is about. And actually, like, not very long before, I had this little dog that had gotten killed. And so it was, that direction was very poignant, because I just kind of took it and ran with it. I guess it affected them, and they said, well, he said,
Okay, kid, you got the job.
To inspire natural performances from his cast, Spielberg drew on his own childlike side.
Good, Henry, great.
He always wanted to have fun. He encouraged it. On Halloween, we were to dress up. Steven was a woman, and he directed all day in the woman costume. He looked great, I have to say.
You gotta take me serious. It's Halloween, folks. I don't dress this way all the time. I'm not trying to get out of the Army like Jimmy Farr. This is action. My date for tonight, for the costume ball. Ah, Miranda, what sweet fingers you have.
Most people just did it during lunch. Steven wore the costume all day.
You know, I think it's going to be, it'll be sadder if it's happy sad.
On the important scenes, Steven would always come up and I would have this probably about a 10-minute pep talk before we began.
He lowers his head real sadly, and he touches his heart, and he says, ouch. And then you'll touch your heart, and you'll say ouch back to him.
When I had to cry, he was amazing. It was like, he had this special way of talking to you, and his voice would change, and it made you cry. And there was something so gentle about it, and I think that's what made your heart break.
Movies are so sad, especially this one.
A very large part of who I am as a human being and who I've become is due to him. There's no question in my mind about that. He was, you know, my godfather, the only sort of father I knew growing up. When I did Playboy magazine, he sent me a huge box with a giant, gorgeous quilt inside of it and a card that said, "Cover yourself up." And the art department in his company, Amblin, had put clothes on each of my pictures. And he's very protective that way, and yet he has such a great sense of humor about it, that he never makes you feel ashamed of who you are.
The premiere of E.T. at the prestigious Cannes Film Festival was an event almost as magical as the film itself.
15 minutes before the movie concluded, these lighters started to light and matches started to be struck. So there was this sort of starlight effect in the theater. And then it got to the point where you couldn't even hear the end of the movie because people were on their feet, stomping and yelling, and it was like being in a rock concert. And this huge searchlight started to sweep the top balcony to find us, and then Steven stood up, and it was just one of those most amazing experiences. I've certainly never had anything like it again.
The little movie Spielberg made for just $10 million became the most successful film to date and one of the most beloved. With E.T., Spielberg achieved more than increased fame and wealth. He had given voice to his own childhood longings and touched viewers' hearts around the world.
I think that's what E.T. sort of represented to not only all of us, but all the kids sort of around the world. This was someone who was never going to hurt you back. This was someone who was going to love you unconditionally, which is what all children want.
E.T. earned Steven Spielberg his third Oscar nomination for Best Director. But once again, Spielberg went home empty-handed. The Oscar went to Richard Attenborough for the Best Picture winner, Gandhi.
1,002, 1,003,
In the summer of 1982, Spielberg scored a double triumph. Besides E.T., he produced and co-wrote the ghost story Poltergeist. If E.T. was a whisper, Spielberg said, Poltergeist was a scream. His script drew heavily on his dark childhood fantasies, like his fear that creatures lived inside his television. No director was more successful or powerful than Steven Spielberg. But just 6 weeks after E.T.'s release, tragedy turned Spielberg's dream life into a nightmare. Twilight Zone, the movie, was a Spielberg co-production, intended as a celebration of the supernatural TV show he loved as a child. Spielberg would direct one of the film's segments, but the first was directed by his friend, John Landis. Early on the morning of July 23, 1982, Spielberg got an urgent call from Landis. Actor Vic Morrow and 2 children had been killed in an accident on the set. Spielberg was not present or involved in the filming, but as co-producer, he was named in civil suits filed by the victims' families. Landis and 4 others faced criminal charges. They were eventually acquitted. For Spielberg, the experience was devastating.
I just saw a lot of depression in Steve after the Twilight Zone incident. He never talked about it. He withdrew quite a bit.
This has been the most interesting year of my film career, Steven Spielberg said. It has mixed the best, the success of E.T., with the worst, the Twilight Zone tragedy. A mixture of ecstasy and grief. It's made me grow up a little more. In 1982, at age 35, Steven Spielberg had triumphed with E.T. and faced tragedy as a producer of Twilight Zone, the movie. After such emotional extremes, he returned to familiar turf in 1983 with his first movie sequel, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
I think what can be good here is that everybody is laughing.
Once again, Spielberg would meet a key woman in his life during a casting audition.
It's nice. You less nervous now?
No. It's original.
The actress was a Texas-born former school teacher named Kate Capshaw. Though she wasn't too interested in the role, she was interested in Steven Spielberg.
I know I was very nervous, and I was very excited, and the minute I walked in, I just loved the way he looked, and I don't know, he was like so sweet, and with his hat and the sunglasses, and I think he even had a poncho on. He really kind of looked ridiculous. And then I asked, could I please sit a little closer, because I was having trouble seeing him, and finally I just said, you know, I would really love for you to take your sunglasses off, because I can't see your eyes. He took them off, and then we had this really wonderful meeting that lasted probably another 30 minutes. It was way too long. I mean, something was going on then. And I was just so excited. I mean, my heart never stopped. And then he said, do you want to play a video game? I said, really? Well, great. Sure, except I don't know how to play video games. And he said, well, come on in here. I've got this really cool video game, which he proceeded, of course, to beat the out of me. I left thinking, who is this guy? He's completely got me nutty.
Oh, God.
Oh, my God.
Capshaw got the part, and their mutual attraction continued, up to a point.
At that particular time, he had a girlfriend, and he had maybe someone who was trying to get back in his life. But we had so much fun. Oh, my gosh, the flirting and the carrying on.
Someone was trying to get back into Spielberg's life. In 1983, Steven flew to India to scout locations for the film. To his surprise, he was met at the airport by Amy Irving. She was in the country to film a TV miniseries. When Spielberg saw his ex-girlfriend, he later said, there was love in her eyes, anger and resentment in mine, but we fell in love again. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom gave Spielberg another smash, but not without controversy. Some critics and the Motion Picture Ratings Board objected to its graphic violence. Spielberg himself later said he went too far. Out of the debate came a new movie rating later that year, PG-13. Despite his success at the box,
I had to fight my daddy, I had to fight my uncles, I had to fight my brothers.
Although author Alice Walker approved of Spielberg for the film, some critics complained the story of an African-American woman should not be told by a white male director. Still, Spielberg said he never felt more relaxed during a shoot. He also coaxed Oscar-nominated work out of two first-time film actresses, Whoopi Goldberg and a Chicago talk show host named Oprah Winfrey.
Every single time the camera rolled, I was terrified. Terrified that
he's going to realize that I don't really do this, and he's going to fire me. Now, the beauty of Steven is he figures out what works for what actor. And he realized that I am better being absolutely natural. So he said, we're just going to let the cameras roll here. And I want you to just tell him how you felt in the store the day you first saw Miss Seeley after you got out of jail. And woo! Oh my goodness. It just came up.
And when I see you, I know there is a God. I know there is a God. And one day I was gonna get to come home.
I remember during the scene in town where they were using all the you know, angry, violent, racist language. And he had asked them to do that because he goes for the truth, you know, every time. And so he'd asked them to call me out of my name and to use the N-word because that would get Sophia riled up. And there's something about hearing it from an angry crowd of people. Well, something about hearing it, period. But he hadn't told me that he was going to do it. So when I walked out there and those people started using the big N-word, I went off all the way with Miss Sophia.
Who do you think you are, you bastard?
He came up to me afterwards and said, you know, are you okay? Are you all right? Yeah, I'm fine. Next time I'd like a little warning, though. Goes, but a warning wouldn't have gotten that reaction.
Just before filming began on The Color Purple, Steven learned from Amy that he was going to become a father. And on June 13th, 1985, as Spielberg directed a childbirth scene, Amy called to say his first child was about to be born. The birth of son Max had a profound effect on Steven. He later said, "A spirit began to ignite in me. I became a Jewish dad at the moment of birth." 5 months later, in a Santa Fe, New Mexico courthouse, Steven and Amy married. At last, Spielberg seemed to have the companionship he'd yearned for. But the separate careers of Mr. and Mrs. Steven Spielberg would remain a source of stress, just as they had years earlier. Released on December 18th, 1985, The Color Purple was a commercial triumph. It received several rave reviews, but some critics accused Spielberg of sentimentalizing the book. A few snidely suggested he stick to science fiction. The most painful reaction came when The Color Purple received 11 Academy Award nominations. Conspicuously missing was a directing nomination for Steven Spielberg.
I think that he felt that it was a slap in the face, and it was. Because how can a movie get 11 nominations without the director being acknowledged?
He was not a happy person. Yeah, that was a real snub.
Despite the Academy's rejection, Spielberg was determined to explore his range as a filmmaker. The result was a period of creative experiment, and it included a personal crisis he would later call one of the 2 worst times of his life. He was also one of its busiest producers, overseeing films like the Back to the Future series. Some of his projects, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, pushed the envelope of movie technology. Others were more personal. In 1986, Spielberg produced An American Tale, the animated story of an immigrant mouse. It was the first Spielberg film to draw from his family's Jewish history. Its hero, Fievel, was named after Spielberg's grandfather, a Russian immigrant, and stories from his life influenced the film. In 1985, Spielberg launched his first TV series, Amazing Stories. It was not a success, but a few years later, Spielberg hit a TV bullseye as executive producer of ER and as producer of the animated Tiny Toons and Animaniacs. Spielberg had become a mogul. His Universal Studios-based company, Amblin Entertainment, was a mini movie factory and an inspiration to others.
The moment I walked into Amblin and saw what one person could create with his own mind, I thought, I could do this. I could do this. I could have a studio. The fact that there was a familial atmosphere there, that everyone seemed to love the work that they were doing. As I was building Harpo Studios, it was Steven that I had in mind because Steven had done it.
In expanding his own ambitions, Spielberg was encouraged by a close friend, the charismatic chairman of Time Warner, Steve Ross, who became a father figure to Spielberg.
Steve Ross enjoyed wine and enjoyed good stories and enjoyed his life. And Steven met with Steve Ross at a time when Steven could have, with his success and his fame, gotten more insular as a man. But Steve Ross really taught Steven how to get outside of his life and enjoy it. I mean, really enjoy it.
In 1987, at age 40, Steven Spielberg received his first honor from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the Irving Thalberg Award, honoring creative producers. In his remarks, Spielberg seemed to speak to his critics, pledging a renewed commitment to the written word.
I'm proud to have my name on this award in his honor because it reminds me of really how much growth as an artist I have ahead of me in order to be worthy of standing in the company of those who have received this before me.
He backed up that pledge with his next film, which showed his growing confidence in tackling adult subjects. Empire of the Sun was Spielberg's first serious film about World War II, an era that had obsessed him since childhood. J.G. Ballard's novel told the story of a boy torn from his family and imprisoned in Shanghai by the Japanese. Its unflinching look at the horrors of war showed a new side of Spielberg, who said, "This movie and turning 40 at almost the same time was no coincidence."
Empire of the Sun was one of my favorite films of his. It examines survival and being a kid on your own, caught up in the forces of a world moving into chaos. Getting into that scope of material, historically and emotionally, was a big jump for Steve.
Spielberg followed Empire of the Sun with a more mainstream project, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Unlike the earlier films in the series, this one had a touch of autobiography. Indiana's strained relationship with his father, played by Sean Connery, seemed to echo Steven's own relationship with his father growing up. But as Spielberg became an adult, he and his father had grown closer.
I think after he got married and had Max and had children, and then we began to reconnect.
We're all living long enough to have second chapters, and they truly are a good team now.
After completing The Last Crusade, Spielberg said he felt like he had graduated from the College of Cliffhanger U. But a much more personal chapter of his life was also ending. In April of '89, after nearly 4 years of marriage, Steven and Amy announced they were getting a divorce. The two would share custody of their son. Spielberg said little about the end of his marriage, but Amy told the press she didn't want to finish her career as the wife of Spielberg or the mother of Max. Spielberg later called his divorce one of the two most painful times of his life. The other was the divorce of his own parents.
All Steve said to me about it was, "Dad, you stayed married a long time and a big mistake. I ain't gonna let myself do that."
In June of 1989, Spielberg was spotted with a new companion, actress Kate Capshaw, who had lost Steven to Amy 6 years before. A year later, in May of 1990, Kate gave birth to Steven's first daughter, Sasha. And in October of 1991, Kate Capshaw became Mrs. Steven Spielberg.
He proposed to me in the bathroom. I was at the sink brushing my teeth, and he was at the sink brushing his teeth. And he said very nonchalantly, I mean, of course, he knew exactly what he was doing, Mr. Drama. But so I was thinking, well, anyway, I'd love to marry you. What do you think about that? And I mean, really, like toothbrush drops and water's running. And I started crying, and it was great. It was great.
Over the next decade, Steven and Kate's family would grow to include 7 children. Spielberg, the filmmaker, was also starting a new life, moving away from escapism toward more personal stories. But the steps between Indiana Jones and Schindler's List were not always smooth. In 1989, Spielberg directed the film Always, a remake of one of his favorite films, the World War II fantasy A Guy Named Joe. But Spielberg's version failed to fly at the box office or with the critics. Spielberg next turned to the lavish fantasy Hook, the story of what happened when Peter Pan grew up and struggled with the pressures of adulthood. Spielberg admitted that the character of Peter, played by his friend Robin Williams, was partly autobiographical.
He lives in a perpetual world of a boy. I mean, Peter Pan does. And sometimes Steven does, but he comes and goes. I mean, he can make a movie like E.T., but he also has this extraordinary business sense. He has a passport, like Breck said, to both worlds. He comes and goes from them easily now, and much more so.
Despite mixed reviews, Hook was a commercial success, but a greater triumph lay just ahead. Spielberg, the director, truly grew up when he filmed a story he had been haunted by for a decade. Schindler's List first entered the life of Steven Spielberg in 1982, 10 years before he felt emotionally ready to make the movie. Thomas Keneally's novel told the true story of a Nazi businessman who became the unlikely protector of over 1,000 Jews. The acclaimed book caught the eye of Spielberg's friend Sid Sheinberg, by now president of Universal Studios. He optioned the book with Spielberg in mind, but the director resisted signing on.
It probably scared him, and maybe he thought he wasn't yet at a place where he should do it.
He hesitated in a very decent way. In fact, he once said to me, he said, you know, I have a tendency to sentimentalize things, and I wished very much not to do anything that would sentimentalize this story.
We of the family kept saying to Steve over the many years, every once in a while we'd say his list, and he was very terse about it. He would just shut us all up with, I'm not ready.
And when he's ready to do something, he'll do it. And if he's not ready, there's nothing on this earth, no person who works for him, not his family, no one who can tell him to do something unless he wants to do it.
And when he was ready, boy, he knew it.
As a child with few Jewish friends, Spielberg had been ashamed of his heritage. But by the early 1990s, Spielberg had embraced his faith after his son's birth and his wife Kate's conversion to Judaism. By 1992, Steven Spielberg was ready to make Schindler's List. Filming was set for March of 1993.
Can Laura jump in?
But before tackling what he knew would be the toughest shoot of his life, Spielberg gave himself and audiences one more ride on a movie roller coaster with a film that marked the next giant step in screen technology. Dinosaurs, like the ones who inhabited 1993's Jurassic Park, had been another of Steven Spielberg's childhood obsessions.
My first toy from a museum that I ever got was a little lead-cast Triceratops. And I became fascinated as a kid, as all kids do, because I think they're bigger than us. And they were something that doesn't exist today. And I think because it doesn't exist today, there's no immediate direct access, it becomes the thing that mythology is made of that makes mythology so fascinating. Only it's real.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
Spielberg also felt a kinship with one of author Michael Crichton's human characters, John Hammond, creator of the world's first dinosaur amusement park. Like Spielberg, Hammond was a showman who pushed technology to the limit, as Spielberg did, with help from Stan Winston's Mechanical Creations and George Lucas's special effects company, Industrial Light and Magic.
It was a challenge to say, well, let's see if we can do this digitally. We think we're there now. We're not sure, but we think we can do it. That we did the demonstration for Steven. And it was quite an event when we showed it to him and also when we showed it down at ILM. I mean, there were a lot of tears shed at that point because we knew it was absolutely the shifting of the medium. It was like the invention of sound.
Released on June 10, 1993, Jurassic Park became the most successful film of all time internationally, breaking the record set by E.T. But while the world shuddered at prehistoric monsters, Steven Spielberg was preoccupied with horrors of a different kind, the kind that had haunted his life since he first heard stories of the Holocaust as a child. As Jurassic Park stormed into the theaters, Spielberg was at work on Schindler's List, the most emotionally powerful film of his career. In February of 1993, director Steven Spielberg began filming the most personally rewarding and most risk-taking project of his career. The film was Schindler's List.
Schindler's List, as a film, violates all the conventional wisdoms of Hollywood. I mean, one by one, the length, the fact there are no Americans in it, the fact it's about a subject nobody wants to see, it's not in color. I mean, take all the rules and Schindler violates them all.
Driven by passion and his own bitter experiences with anti-Semitism, Steven Spielberg was fearless in directing Schindler's List.
Good.
He definitely knew, probably more than any of us, where we were going was going to be so painful. It was going to be so sad. It was going to make us so angry.
We were shooting the film in Krakow in Poland, and sometimes on the very sites, 8 times out of 10, where these events actually took place.
To make sure the film avoided any slickness, Spielberg created most of his images on the spot, without his usual aid of storyboards.
There were many mornings I would see him go out, and there would be thousands of extras. Vintage cars, buildings, the whole gamut. And seeing Stephen standing, biting his fingers down to the core, which he does, and like mumbling, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Where am I going to put the camera? And then once he did decide, okay, I'm going to put the camera here and I'm going to do a shot of the train on a wide lens. Well, he was like the train he was shooting, you know. It just gathered speed and momentum, and you had to keep up with them, you know, sometimes physically and certainly emotionally. He moved very, very fast, and it was fantastic. That was thrilling.
My computer's going to break down.
I went to Poland to watch him film quite a bit of it. There were a couple of days that I couldn't separate the fact that it wasn't really happening. There was a scene of taking the children and the mothers rushing and screaming, and I lost it, totally lost it. I only have to rerun it in my head and I'm gone.
One particular story that I think says a lot about Steven is when he set off to do this movie, bringing all of us, there was some team agreements that we had come up with. One of them was that he would be home when the sun set, and that would be, because it was winter, would be like 5, 6 o'clock. So at the end of the second week, and he came home, and it must have been 7:15. And I looked at him and I was like, well, you know what? You're just not keeping your agreement, Steven. I mean, is this the way it's going to be now for 4 months? He just looked at me, sat down, and he told me what he'd been shooting that day. He was shooting the interior of the gas chamber when the ladies go in. And I started crying, he started crying, and it was just this very powerful moment that all the rules, however you go and you make a movie, take all those rules, whatever book that's in, toss it, because this was about something else.
I remember the day we shot The Liquidation of the Ghetto incredibly well, because it was a Sunday. It was one of those horrible European days where it's drizzling with rain, and we were actually on this crest of a little hill, exactly in the area where Oskar Schindler did observe this liquidation of the ghetto. When we came to doing my close-ups, Steven became like an old-time director. But he was holding the reins of my horse below camera, looking up to me saying, okay, you're seeing 3 soldiers beat up a girl. You're seeing this, you're seeing that. He does that thing that great actors can do. He can totally submerge himself in that world, and yet also have an outside part of him that's observing himself and checking himself all the time, saying, don't do that. You did that before. and it worked, but it doesn't work. It's not going to work this time. Find some other way.
Each night, Spielberg returned to his hotel emotionally drained, but he continued to work, turning his energy to finishing Jurassic Park, which he filmed just before traveling to Poland. Jurassic Park's computer effects and music were still being completed in California.
I would be recording with the orchestra one day, and by some magic of electronics, Steven could, in his cutting room in Poland, hear the music that we'd done the day before, the very same day, and make whatever comments he made. With the kind of mental agility that he's got, it's not beyond his resources at all.
Spielberg's friend Robin Williams also offered a welcome break from the intensity of Schindler's List.
I used to call him in Poland just to try and cheer him up, because, you know, if you're shooting during the day at Auschwitz, things get quite intense. So at night I would call him and or on the weekends, and just make him laugh for about 20 minutes. And it was just a fix, but it would just help just to kind of clear his head.
How did you survive?
By miracle.
By miracle?
Yeah.
On December 15th, 1993, Schindler's List opened to tremendous acclaim around the world. Spielberg had predicted the film would not make a profit, but it grossed an astounding $321 million. It also launched an increased worldwide awareness of the Holocaust. In February of 1994, Schindler's List earned 12 Oscar nominations, including a Best Director nomination for Spielberg. Though considered the front runner, Spielberg did not know if he'd win the one honor that had eluded him his entire career, until the night of March 21st, 1994.
Steven Spielberg for Schindler's List.
This is the first time I've ever had one of these in my hand. So, I want to thank my wife, who's here with me tonight, for rescuing me 92 days in a row in Krakow, Poland last winter, when things got just too unbearable. And my mom, who's here, who is my lucky charm.
I think if he hadn't gotten it, you would have seen one irate Jewish woman storming that stage.
The film was also named Best Picture, winning a total of 7 Academy Awards. With Schindler's List, Steven Spielberg achieved a critical, commercial, and cultural triumph. It was a high point he admitted he might never top. But Spielberg's creativity was already jumping into bold new directions in 1994. And among them was a top-secret project that would become one of the biggest gambles of Spielberg's career. After Schindler's List, Steven Spielberg told reporters he planned to take a break from directing. But Spielberg, the producer, couldn't help but plunge into half a dozen new projects.
He's got 400 Rubik's Cubes in his head, and he's working on them all at the same time, and it doesn't seem to bother him. On the course of making the set, I can see him playing with his kids, talking on the phone about a cut, looking at 3 shots being set up while he's having a meeting on storyboards for something that's going to happen next week, and everything is getting done to everybody's satisfaction.
One of Spielberg's most personal projects was inspired by the success of Schindler's List.
Survivors kept saying to him, "I have a story to tell you." And he thought for a while, and he said, "My God, I've made 1,200 friends and 10,000 enemies. 1,200 friends are the Schindler's Jews whose story he had told, and the thousands of enemies were the other survivors whose stories he had not told." And he felt badly about it, but then he listened more intensely. And he really heard something very different, which is that survivors didn't want him to tell the story, but they wanted him to be the midwife by which the story could be told. What he did was to start the Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation. As of the spring of 1998, we've interviewed 44,000 survivors in 30 languages in 52 countries.
And what this essentially is Henry has just given 2 to 5 hours of testimony about what happened to him in the Holocaust. Before the Holocaust, what was his life like? What was the life like during it? Who did he lose? Who survived?
25 years earlier, Steven Spielberg promised his early supporter Chuck Silvers that he'd give back once he succeeded. It's a promise he kept. Spielberg funded a scoring stage at USC, one of the schools that turned him down in the 1960s. He financed a pediatric ward in Los Angeles, and he helped launch the Starbright Foundation, a computer network that let hospitalized children across the country play together and talk.
Maybe it's just for an hour during the day, but for that hour, they can escape from their pain and their reality to a place where anything can happen.
One area Spielberg kept his energy and money out of was the financing of movies. But that changed in 1994 when he put millions into a project that took an equal investment of courage.
The creation of DreamWorks is not courage, it's insanity.
On October 12, 1994, Spielberg, his friend Jeffrey Katzenberg, and producer David Geffen announced they were teaming up to create DreamWorks, the first new Hollywood studio in 6 decades.
Hollywood movie studios were at their zenith when they were driven by point of view and personalities. Together with Jeffrey and David, I want to create a place driven by ideas and the people who have them.
Steven was very clear in saying, I will not do this unless Katie is 101% for it, because it's very important to me that I be a good father and a good husband, and I'm not going to sacrifice that. She said to me, she said, Jeffrey, here's the deal. You can have him after he takes the kids to school, and you better deliver him back here at 5:30 at night. And what you do with him in between, have a great time. I hope you guys have a real big success and a lot of fun doing it. But you leave him alone.
After directing The Lost World, a sequel to Jurassic Park, Spielberg turned to his first film for DreamWorks. Like Schindler's List, it would be an ambitious story taken from history.
He will break loose his chains. He will decimate his enemies. He will try and try and try against all odds, against all prejudices, to get home.
Amistad was based on an actual slave revolt of 1839. Producer Debbie Allen had spent a decade trying to get the movie made. After seeing Schindler's List, she decided Steven Spielberg was the only director with the power and the ability to make the film.
Think about stories and think about family and jokes and funny things that might have happened where your farms were, where you lived, the villages you lived in. And all those things will help paint a very wonderful picture of this extended family.
Amistad was among 1997's most anticipated films. It earned an Oscar nomination for co-star Anthony Hopkins as former President John Quincy Adams, and praise for newcomer Shimon Hansu as the African's leader, Sin K.
I will call into the past and beg my ancestors to come and help me. For at this moment, I am the whole reason they have existed at all.
But Amistad's release was mired in controversy when a writer sued Spielberg, claiming her book on the revolt had been plagiarized. A judge ruled in Spielberg's favor, but the film was a commercial disappointment. 1997 was also clouded for the director by a stalker who was arrested and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
Ryan! Anybody know Ryan? 101st Airport?
But by the year's end, Spielberg was at work shooting a new film, Saving Private Ryan, a World War II drama about the rescue of a young soldier amid the chaos of D-Day. Its star was Spielberg's close friend, Tom Hanks.
I don't know anything about Ryan. I don't care. But if finding him so he can go home, if that earns me the right to get back to my wife, well, then that's my mission. Usually, conventional filmmakers will start, get what they want, stop, then talk about what to do next. But he won't. He'll start and keep it going and say, now do something else, and now try something else. And you have a tendency just to go right along with him because he's Steven, and he's making it so instinctively natural.
You want to explain the math of this to me? I mean, where's the sense of risking the lives of the 8 of us to save one guy?
20 degrees. Anybody want to answer that?
Lost boys and lost children. I mean, that's the subject that most powerfully moves him. Private Ryan is almost the ultimate lost boy, a soldier who must be rescued at enormous cost to his rescuers. At some point in Steven's life, he felt lost. It doesn't feel that way anymore, but he can remember those feelings, and they move him.
And cut. Good.
By 1998, Steven Spielberg was 51 years old. The man that critics once considered the eternal child of cinema had finally won respect as a mature adult filmmaker. Spielberg had also learned to combine his passion for the movies with a passionate family life with his wife and 7 children.
He's so into his children, more than a film director, more than anything. I mean, he's the carpooler. So he cooks breakfast. I said, Steve, you don't cook. He does.
We're right on Steven goes, hey, Steven, you're going to gotta get a bigger car. Because, you know what, you got too many kids to fit in the van now. You don't have enough seats, you know? The baby seats alone are going to take up too much space.
I think the thing that would be most surprising about Steven to the world would be how easily he gets his feelings hurt. You know, you think he's this guy who doesn't worry about the opening of their movie or get hurt with, a sentence in a review or someone who didn't talk to him long enough at a party or didn't say hi to him. He's such a bad actor. It's what I love about him. He wears all of his emotions on his sleeve. What you see is what you get.
Ladies and gentlemen, Steven Spielberg.
Spielberg shared some of those emotions the night he received the prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Film Institute. One of the night's highlights was the tribute he gave to his parents, Arnold Spielberg and Leah Adler.
You know, growing up was frustrating for me, because it is, I think, for most kids. But thank you for letting me own that experience. Thanks for giving me the chance to answer some of my own questions, for not panicking and trying to spoon feed me all the answers. I have been to so many AFI dinners where recipients have only been able to thank their parents by looking up to heaven. And I feel so lucky that all I have to do is look out at table 211 and say how much I love you both.
Oh boy, I'm so proud of him, it's amazing. You know, thank God you didn't become an engineer, Steve. You'd have been a mediocre engineer, and now you're a great filmmaker. Who needs to be an engineer? I'll be the engineer. I'm a pretty good engineer, so I'll take that part. You take the filmmaking. That's how I feel.
Today, the creative vision of Steven Spielberg remains as ambitious as it was 4 decades ago, when a young filmmaker first staged pageants of war and alien attacks in the Arizona desert. Through the images of cinema, a lost boy found himself and left his loneliness behind to become the most celebrated movie storyteller of his time.